Well, welcome. I'm John Clark, a social worker and Justice and Peace Monitor, as I now call myself. Today, we're going to talk about the state of the South African criminal justice system with an experienced forensic investigator, Sarah Berger, who's an attorney, got lots to tell about her experience. Coincidentally, the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Sharmila Batoy, has contributed some food for thought. This morning, I've opened the media pages and I found that yesterday she addressed a gathering and declared, "We cannot prosecute our way out of corruption." So we will discuss that, but to frame our conversation, as is my inclination, is to frame things in terms of history. As you can see by my grey locks and beard, I was been around in the 80s. And in 1977, when I was at university, Saki Matkazama, who is now a leading South African businessman, found himself and a large group of young student activists sentenced to a 5-year prison term on Robben Island for having participated in the 1976 student uprising in the townships around Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape. When they were released in 1982, having served their terms, Saki had made very good use of his incarceration. He had passed his matric, completed his first year of a BA degree through UNISA, and of course sat alongside South Africa's legendary father of democracy, Nelson Mandela, in prison, together with people like Walter Sisulu and others. So he came out very well educated. I sat Saki down earlier this year to reflect on that chapter of South Africa's struggle history, because I'm busy writing a book at the moment on the life and legacy of a liberal peace activist, Molly Blackburn. Now, Saki had facilitated her introduction into the local black townships, which were cauldrons of angry protest and brutal security police crackdown. As a liberation struggle hero, Saki had the necessary credibility to bridge the suspicion, racial tensions, and hostility towards white people to enable good people like Molly to crack through the edifice of apartheid by showing grounded solidarity and support of youth activists from COSAS in the black townships of the Eastern Cape. So in our conversation, besides validating many of my assumptions, Saki told of risks that they had had to take to ensure that incarceration was used to maximum benefit to get an education.
And I think the years I was on London, even though I wasn't registered with any institution, I learned the most. Yeah, because if you had any idea, you had to defend it in the courtyard by making sure that you read and reread and understood what what you read and where it fits in your conception and understanding of how the revolution had to be pursued. The one thing I'm grateful for, prison is a prison, is the fact that I got there with a curiosity that made me read voraciously. In the olden days, including our time to some extent, if a book has been smuggled onto the island, you knew that it could be confiscated within a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever. So what they used to do is give the book to the fastest readers. In fact, so that they can read, and many people who can read, so that if the book is taken, there's at least some people here who have access to it. In the olden days, I'm told, they would sit, whether it's moonlight or whatever, because they put the lights off, and actually sit around, and fastest reader here, and it goes to declining order. You read this page and you tear it off, and you give it to this guy. Okay. Then you continue, then he reads and passes to that guy, and then it goes until if it's not taken, you then put those papers together for the next group. Because you couldn't hazard a situation where you say, we'll give one person to read, and they're going to take it anyway at some point. So that's how the first group of people used to get it. By the time we arrived, we had access to Cape Provincial Library. So at least we could get books, as long as it doesn't have a title that says anything political. Quite often, because it must go to the censors before. I mean, in any institution, you get lazy people, they just look at the title and pass the book. Because many of these books are about philosophy or mathematics or something. And this is what is unschooled in these kinds of things. But the title.
Now, the interview can be viewed at this link above. I just ask your pardon for the fact that it's not as professional as I would like it to have been. I wasn't quite expecting to get such an incredible story. So watch that and you'll get a nice piece of history. Now, Saki now has a master's degree, I think, from Boston University. And upon returning for exile, was elected as an ANC member of parliament in the first democratic parliament before he was then redeployed because of his good education to be the CEO of Transnet, but he's no longer active in politics. He exited all when he saw how things were going in terminal decline, it would seem, in 2008. So with his enlightening account of his prison education in my mind, fast forward from there to 2024, when news broke that the Eastern Cape Premier, Oscar Mabuyane, was under investigation for colluding with a corrupt Fort Hare academic, Edwin Ijeoma, who has now since resigned after being suspended, to commit academic fraud. It spoke very loudly of just how South Africa has regressed since the Mandela era, as systemic corruption of the ANC and the state has taken a grip on our society.
Fort Hare. The unit is currently investigating claims of corruption, including academic fraud linked to the Eastern Cape Premier, Oscar Mabuyane. The SIU has accused Mabuyane of failing to cooperate in their probe into his alleged illegitimate master's thesis. In court papers filed last week, the unit says this is evidence showing foul play in the Premier's pursuit of the master's degree at the university, amid claims he did not write the proposal for the thesis himself.
The investigation at the University of Fort Hare has proceeded well thus far and uncovered evidence that is currently being assessed for the purposes of informing the findings and actions to be taken. The SIU is mindful of the proclamation and some aspect of the investigation that has been challenged in the High Court, and the matter is pending in court. However, due to the assertion covered in the media having the effect on misleading the public, the SIU was left with no option but to set the record straight in the public.
The Daily Maverick journalist Estelle Ellis has been following events surrounding this case, Mabuyane and the University of Fort Hare. She joins me now. Estelle, good evening. This is such a strange case. You have the SIU investigating corruption and alleged academic fraud at the University of Fort Hare, and a whole premier decides he has to intervene and stop the case. What does Oscar Mabuyane actually want in his application?
Yes, so I think this was a fairly, in my own opinion, this was a disastrous court application for the Premier. He started off trying to stop the entire probe. Then, on very short notice, as an extremely urgent application, because the SIU wanted to talk to him and they wanted some documentation from him. And then he amended it to say, no, he doesn't want to stop the entire probe because he's in favor of the probe, but he just wants it to exclude him. And he says that the terms of the proclamation as signed by President Cyril Ramaphosa does not include a probe of his dealings, let's call it that, at the university for a master's degree or attempt to obtain one. But he's very cagey about the details of his master's attempt to obtain a master's degree.
It's such a strange thing. I mean, the obvious sort of question would be, if he had nothing to hide, why does it matter? I was going to ask you if you think, does he have a strong case? But you say it seems almost disastrous in your opinion.
It was just interesting to me that, you know what they say, of bad cases makes bad law. This Premier, in my mind, shouldn't have challenged this investigation. He claims he's got nothing to hide. It's nothing more simple than to say, here's my academic records. Here is the summary of my dealings with this professor who was enrolling high-profile officials in the state and politicians into his program. This is what happened. But instead, things are still, even in his affidavit, it's very murky. And it was Vice-Chancellor Sakila Bulungu called him out on it and said, just come up with in the court papers, he said, You can't just deny that you did anything wrong, but there's very little of that. And, if I can just add this, the SIU is empowered by law to investigate in the public interest. And I think it's important that they do. I find it very strange that a person professing to be an anti-corruption premier would do something to this extent on this such an urgent basis.
However, even more worrying than the fact that Mabuyane had allegedly tried to take shortcuts in his academic studies is what happened to the forensic investigators from Horizon Forensics earlier this year, who had discovered the fraud. Before the Easter long weekend, on the 28th of March, a scene played out that could have been mistaken as an episode from that Hollywood TV series FBI, when a heavily armed group of police officers from the National Political Killings Task Team, the National Intervention Unit, and the Tactical Response Unit swooped on the offices and homes of Sarah Berger, a director of Horizon Forensics, and Bradley Conradi of BCHC attorneys. They thereafter arrested them, bundled them into police vehicles, and took them to the airport and put them on a Lear jet that was parked on the runway, ready to fly them to East London, where they were then locked up on charges of racketeering and fraud. Apparently, this jet is the one usually used by the former Minister of Police, Becky Cele. Now, because of the long weekend, Sarah Berger spent 6 days in the cells before getting a bail hearing. Bradley Conradi was kept for 2 weeks. Now, leaving aside any speculation as to whether they were guilty, and the trial will only get underway in March next year, their constitutional rights have clearly been grossly violated. Our Bill of Rights does not allow that sort of conduct from the police in the modern democratic era. That's the sort of thing that comes straight out of the 80s. Well, to add to the irony, this treatment was in sharp contrast to what happened to Premier Oscar Mabuyane, Mabuyane was successful, the can got kicked down the road, but only until now. That was in June this year. Now the SIU has corrected whatever procedural flaws it may have made, and President Ramaphosa has issued a fresh proclamation to the SIU to proceed with this investigation, and has given it a green light to expand the investigation into allegations of academic fraud, including Mabuyane's attempt to obtain an alleged fraudulent Masters and PhD degrees. So let's allow this ironic contrast to sink in. In 1984, former ANC member Saki Makhuzoma was in fact helped by Molly Blackburn and others to get special travel documents to enable him to travel to Boston, because the South African government refused to give him a passport because he was an ANC-aligned political activist. And now in 2024, an elected ANC premier is facing allegations of fraudulently embossing his academic record with fake accomplishments. Well, what's been happening to Sarah Berger and Bradley Conradi, who are the ones now accused of racketeering? Well, let's ask Sarah to take us through what has happened. Well, welcome, Sarah. You have really given me a real kind of turbocharge to my work. But maybe just start and tell us a bit about yourself, your background, your history, and why do you do what you do as a forensic investigator?
Thanks, John, and nice to speak to you. I lived in the Eastern Cape for many years as a child. I've been born in Cape Town, lived in the Eastern Cape for a short period of time, enjoyed the farm life there, enjoyed the beauty. So working there again years later in my professional career was a privilege, because I got to see all this beauty in the Eastern Cape again. But anyway, settled in Cape Town, studied an LLB, did various sorts of jobs that gave me life experience, and landed up doing my articles at Bradley Conradi, Hilton Cheadle Attorneys, which is really where I wanted to be, and was very happy to do so, because we do constitutional law, labor law, administrative law, and there's no case that is the same. But as a result of that type of work, there are always forensic investigations involved. Bradley Conradi had a forensic business, Horizon Forensics. His co-director at the time benefited a lot from the sort of forensic investigative work flowing out of BCHC attorneys. He left in around 2021, and Bradley asked that I was a junior associate at that point in time, if I would look at a couple of the matters that were coming into Horizon Forensics. And that is how my interest in it began. And coincidentally, I was quite good at it as well. So I would run some sort of investigations in the background and produce some reports so that he could also have a look at the sort of quality of work that was being pushed out of Horizon. And I enjoyed it tremendously. It is no different really to practicing law, other than the fact that your timelines are not as strict procedurally, but you're still performing the job of a lawyer and having to apply your legal brain. So that's pretty much how I got into forensics. And of course, not expecting that I would have this little U-turn in my life just as a result of doing my job.
Well, was it a U-turn or was it a progression? Because I mean, if you're involved in seeking to expose facts and truth so that we can get prosecutions going, it is kind of inevitable given where we've come from in South Africa's history of state capture and the ways in which they've repurposed virtually every state institution for the criminal syndicates. My sense is, having heard your story and hear that maybe you're being prepared for something greater. Do you see anything positive out of this experience so far?
I do. I feel a lot of positivity out of the experience. I think I probably would have sworn at you had you asked me that after I got out on bail in April. I might have been quite crass about it and said, I don't want to do this. I just want to go and work in my garden. Unfortunately, gardening doesn't pay the bills. And the other aspect to it is this is a fantastic job. You have to apply your mind. I just suppose I never ever thought it right through to the end of the process. And I also didn't realize that at the time that I would be exposed to 62 investigations at the University of Fort Hare. It's an abnormal number of investigations for any person to be involved in or in any one institution. But it also goes to the depth of the rot there. So not all investigations turn out to be, criminal complaints and go to court and are prosecuted. Sometimes you find minor offenses which are mere disciplinary offenses, and sometimes, rarely though, you'll find that there's no wrongdoing. So I suppose during the period of my trajectory of my investigation, specifically at the University of Fort Hare, those turned on major criminal elements because there are a lot of those elements operating within the university, from secretary all the way up to the highest levels, vis-a-vis my private clients, where you may be supporting them on litigation for things like anti-competitive behavior and springboarding and bringing urgent applications like Anton Pillars to prevent people from stealing intellectual property and information of companies, which in my view now is a far safer route. But I agree with you in the sense that safer doesn't always make the hugest change. So I think that the work that we've done there and the work that I have done there is coming into fruition now, and there is some changes, but I still worry about the speed with which the police and the prosecuting authority are moving on those matters.
Well, I think there are two aspects to this, and obviously you now are charged with racketeering together with 16 others. Now, I would imagine that because that trial's still coming up, you're not quite at liberty to speak too much about it. I do think that you are entitled to talk about the way the police have behaved and that task unit that came down and how the investigation has proceeded. Because, I mean, it's not the police that are going to be doing the prosecuting now. It's going to be the NPA. But there has to be a concern expressed. Now, I'm speaking for somebody who's been working now with whistleblowers and with other people who experience retaliation for speaking truth to power. And I want to give you the chance to say what you need to say and how are you and what's cooking now? But just get it off your chest and tell us what it is that most aggravates you about the way in which you were treated, despite the fact that you are a respected officer of the courts, an admitted attorney.
I think I'll start off just by correcting something. And you're quite correct that they want to bring a racketeering charge against the accused. It was alleged in March, when we first appeared, that there was a racketeering certificate, but in fact it turned out not to be the case. And so those charges were struck off the charge sheet, and that was a public event, so I am able to speak about that freely.
Okay, just to hold you there, I think just for the benefit of listeners, the racketeering charge, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as a layman, I understand it that it's an innovation in our law, which is an attempt to try and get the kingpins as well as the foot soldiers all together. So if you can prove common cause or common purpose and get them all in the dock at the same time, it means that you get a much higher reward for all the effort that's taken. But it's higher risk because, and I just want to put this in the context of the apartheid era, in the apartheid era, they had something called common purpose, which actually was hugely abused by the apartheid security police, because what they would do is when people were protesting, and there would sometimes be agents provocateurs go into the crowd and provoke violence. And then the police would come to quell the violence, and everybody could get arrested. And even the organizers, the unions and all the rest, would then be prosecuted under this doctrine of common purpose. Now, in the modern democratic era, they said, no, there's got to be some checks and balances. We can't have it abused like that. The National Director of Public Prosecution has to certify a racketeering charge. It's not something that's at the competence and the seniority of a provincial director. Is that correct?
That is correct. A certificate needs to be issued by the head of public prosecutions, which would be Shamila Batoy's office. The concept, though, of the Poker Act, which deals with racketeering, is way more abstract, and it's based on American principles. And it is there to protect people from just being scooped up in a net and, here you're all part of one big group. And there's a lot of elements that you have to prove with racketeering. But yeah, I think that's another episode on its own, because it's quite a lengthy act.
Yeah, but you did say that they claimed that they had already a certification when you were arrested way back in March, but they didn't.
They didn't.
I was with you when you appeared in your second appearance in Alice in the beginning of September. We were then told that, they still have to apply for one, and it's going to take 6 months because Shamila Batoy's got a very busy inbox, and she won't be able to get around to apply her mind to it until March next year. And the point I'm trying to make is, it's to mean that your normal professional life has had to be put on hold for at least a year because of what seems to be a highly manipulated and unprocedural way of the way in which the matter's been conducted.
I think I'll just comment on that, and I'm going to tread carefully here, but I'm just going to, and I think this will capture exactly how I feel before I go into the details of the process, is that I have no faith in the prosecution in this matter. And that's exactly how I feel about it. If you put 2 and 2 together, there was no racketeering certificate, and now they are applying for it.
I mean, I know I don't want to trigger you again in terms of the trauma that you experienced by being arrested and put in prison. If you'd like to share a bit of that experience, not because I'm wanting to scare other people, but because you've come through it and you are a survivor. You're not a victim of the process. You've found a little bit of a kind of a resilience in it all. And I want other people that I counsel to actually know that. So if you don't mind, tell us a bit about what that experience was for you.
I think it's prudent to start it on a day of who I was on 28 March, arriving at work in jeans. It's a nice long weekend up ahead. You're getting ready to relax. I had ideas of gardening. I was going to go and buy bark and beautiful plants, and I was just living my life. and drafting some reports and getting it out to clients. And then, the police arrived at my office door. And the reason why I'm taking it back right there is because there's this almost stratosphere that happened inside of me that I couldn't believe. And I couldn't, it's like having an out-of-body experience. I couldn't believe that this was really happening. It really did feel like I was in a movie, and I kept on going, is this real? It can't be real. This is going to end at some point in time, until I had to lay in the holding cells overnight, then get jetted off, humiliated in several ways. I mean, there's some vile stories. I'm quite comfortable with sharing those because they are human nature things that happen to us every day. But, after I'd got off the flight in the Eastern Cape, I needed to use the bathroom badly. And the police all took turns to go and open up the toilet seat and share their comments with me. Denied the right to an attorney. Many things happened to Bradley as well. He wasn't taken to hospital following a court order. There's just so many of them. And then, of course, what we've stated before is, the amount of police that were on scene as well, that all thought that we had these bodyguards. I mean, we can't afford bodyguards. It's FBI movie stuff, At some point I counted, because we have recordings of these videos, about 11 policemen standing around me with forensic people and so on. And, I just kind of sat there on this chair looking at these people with a bottle of water, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So from there until now, I didn't think that I was going to be able to recover after laying on the jail cell and eating sampan beans, which wasn't too bad. It was a real eye-opener for me that these places are, they are absolutely vile. They are it's not a habitable condition for anybody to be on a normal day. There's feces all over the walls. It's flooded with water. The lights aren't working. The people aren't attentive to you. You won't get reading material. If you ask for it, you can beg for it. They search you. They ridicule you. And so the scars left after that, was even when I hear a reverberation in the pipes of my shower in the morning, I think to myself, my God, there's men out here with guns, So you have to go through these processes of severe PTSD, of night sweats, of not being able to sleep, of the rattles. And you have to get back to some sort of equilibrium in your life, realizing that you've got to force yourself to do certain things, and force yourself back into a routine again. I think that's more or less where I've landed now, where I've said to myself, well, you have to do this, Sarah. You have to pep talk yourself. You have to do this, even if you don't want to. Go and walk for 10 minutes. Go and breathe for a few minutes. Go and read for a few minutes. Find some peace. Allow yourself to enjoy a garden or a sunny day or a few minutes of quiet. Easier said than done, because often your mind is racing and you're on various pills and so on to deal with the kind of anxiety that you're dealing with, and uncertainty. I think that's the biggest contributing factor. I think now that I know that the docket is here, it has normalized my life a little bit more. Still don't know why I'm here. The docket doesn't tell me that, but I feel that I've got a little bit more control over my life, and I can start saying things like, this is a life experience and I can't base my entire existence off this. And since then, I've successfully gone on to do many other investigations. And it's a welcome distraction, because one of the things that happens to you when you get exposed in these sorts of positions is that you start doubting yourself. You start doubting your ability. You start looking at yourself and saying, but what did I do wrong? How, did I get this so wrong? And when you start succeeding again and doing small things, little victories that you should celebrate each day. One of the things that Bradley and I were doing were literally at the end of the day, creating a list of gratitude and saying, okay, well, we're grateful for this. These clients stuck with us. These clients gave us work. And it's little victories like those, along with many blows, that actually help build your esteem up again. It's like a legal process. Nothing's quick and fast and easy. People come to you and say, oh, can you give us a solution today? Well, unfortunately, you need to take the following steps. Then you need to give them 10 days. Then you get 15 days, then another 10 days. So it's a process. And I'm very glad that mentally I am where I am now. But I honestly do believe people like John, yourself, and many others, Mary de Haas, Max Price, Wayne Duvenacher, all those people out there that offer just a message. Even Craig Pedersen of TCG, somebody who stayed in the industry for years, he's a doyen in forensics, has just frequently messaged me as well. And those little pieces of support and encouragement and check-ins have really, really gone a long way for me. It's really been soup for my soul. So, yeah, find support.
Yeah, Sarah, thank you. What comes to mind is you sharing your experience, and I just want to refer folk to another video, which you can get the link here, of another whistleblower who I counseled, who had blown the whistle on corruption in South Sudan, and who was on his way to report what he had seen as the wrongdoing in the company that had hired him to his embassy in Dar es Salaam. And he got stopped in Kigali and arrested and put in prison in a Rwandan jail in Kigali because his bosses had got wind of this. And he was then illegally extradited back to Juba in South Sudan. And he's a chartered accountant, a professional man from Malawi originally. But one of the abiding things, he said that he just could not believe what was happening to him. And he said that what helped him enormously is when he was in the prison, there were also judges and other lawyers and all sorts of other professional people there who were in prison who had got a bit of experience. He said that he was told in prison that just accept the fact that that is where he is, rather than allow his mind to keep being in denial of it. Accept that this is what doesn't mean say approve of where you are, but he says it's almost like transcending the sense of shock and denial, and to then maybe grieve. Instead of getting so hit up with grievance, just grieve the fact that something has happened that's irreversible. You're in this prison, and if you don't eat, if you don't drink, if you don't start looking after yourself, you're going to perish. And that's what they want you to do. I mean, his story goes on. He talks about he ended up with 16 months in a prison in Juba, waiting trial, and eventually did get out. And did eventually find a judge that was sympathetic to him and got it. It's a hell of a story. But I just want to reference it now because people are watching this, and I think I'm doing it much for Biswick's sake, because he doesn't realize how much he taught me. He said that I'm now more equipped as a social worker to be able to be in support and in counsel and solidarity with people like you. So that's how a sort of an invisible thread is now connecting us all. People who are committed to speaking truth to power, who know that the truth will ultimately be our emancipation and our liberation. But at the moment, and what comes to mind, and this is a chance for me to do one of my favorite little kind of cliched sayings now. They're saying, it says in warfare, the truth becomes the first casualty. In lawfare, truth becomes the hostage. They hold the truth hostage for as long as they can, hoping that the truth teller will perish and that the truth will die with them. It seldom, if ever, does. So I just share that with you as a bit of encouragement and also encouragement to others, because it does seem to me that the whole way in which this racketeering charge has been brought, my theory is that it's a deliberate overreach in order to hold the truth hostage as to what's really going on in the corruption in the Eastern Cape, to overcomplicate it by having 16 people, all included, as accused as part of a conspiracy. And it just doesn't make sense to me because, I mean, if you're going to commit a crime, you don't invite 16 people, many of whom are strangers, along for the ride, because any one of them could turn into a whistleblower and you keep it very tight and narrow to people that you could trust. When I came to the court, I mean, you could see that few people knew each other. Some did, but they were like strangers to themselves. And I think that was your experience too. Some of the people that you met for the first time, you didn't know.
Most.
Really?
Most.
Say a bit about that.
Well, I mean, you come out of the holding cells. You've never ever seen these people in your life before, but you're supposed to be working in some sort of organized crime racket with them. and you're looking around trying to ascertain who is who and who is what. And, for the first time you hear it when the court reads out who the accused are. I'd say that, probably 90% of the people, 80% of the people standing there, neither Bradley or I had ever met at all. And if we had, it had been on a consultation in relation to an investigation, because we'd investigated certain of the accused as well. And the police are aware of that.
But they've got to now prove common purpose and common cause, that you all knew each other. I mean, how are they going to do that? So I'm laughing, but it actually makes me angry because I've got a vivid memory of what happened in the 80s. Now, for myself, and now doing this research for my book, and it just leaves me outraged, so outraged that we should find ourselves regressing into the past. But anyway, we got through those crises. What's going to get us through this one? What's going to get you back on track, and what's going to turn the corner for us?
I must just, before we go there, I need to just add this, because I was thinking about what you said about Saki and how they sat in prison, tearing this book apart, hungry to learn. To go and do a degree is not an easy task. I don't know about by today's standards, and that's another debate all in itself, but you need to be hungry to learn. And there's something so satisfying about that story about Saki, that the people were tearing pages off, and whoever could read the fastest read the fastest, and then it went down the chain, and there was just pieces of paper and shredded up, all this knowledge absorbed by people. It is such an insult. It is such an insult when you have gone and studied and sacrificed to go and learn to be a skilled professional and a contributing member of society, like Bradley has done, like I have done. And then you hear of people that are actually governing provinces and running our country that are just buying degrees. It's a shame and it's a disgrace. And I've now even forgotten your question.
No, I'm just saying, what's going to get us through? What's going to help us turn the corner? And in a sense, you're answering it. You're saying, well, let's look at the past. Let's look what happened to people in the past. There was accountability. I mean, what I take away from Saki telling the story is that, these prisoners in Robben Island had a real sense of accountability to each other. You had to really kind of play your part, and there was discipline. There was a kind of a determination, a psychological resilience, which, they developed with each other. But now the paradox of it is that we now have freedom, but people have interpreted, well, freedom from what? But freedom for what? Freedom to basically loot and steal and cheat, and think you're going to get away with it because you've got certain rights. But then when you don't get away with it, and when you do get called out, and you do find evidence that there has been this alleged, kind of academic fraud, well, very quick to resort to apartheid tactics to come and snuff this all out. Well, it, of course, is not going to work. So I just want to say, I hope Oscar Mabuyane watches this, and everyone else. But let's give us some comments too about where things are going to go from here, and what South African civil society needs to do to ensure that it ends well.
I think the one word that stood out from what you were speaking about now, and that's the big, the A word in South Africa that no one wants to address, and that's accountability. And I think that because our leaders are not accountable and they refuse to step down when they know that they've done wrong, it leads the subordinates and the juniors and the cascading right on to the secretary to believe that they can get away with this as well. And the only way that we believe that we are going to succeed and get a fair trial, if it ever goes to trial in this matter, is if each and every one of the people that are involved in this matter are held to account. And I mean that right from the prosecuting authority all the way down. We received our docket, and there's some alarming things in there. And the only way it's going to be held to account is if everybody has to come and answer. And I'm not afraid to stand in front of committees or in front of the public and they can scrutinize and ask me whatever question they want. I have nothing to hide, but I'm afraid there are certain people that have got a lot of skeletons in their closet, and they will have to come and be accountable for that too.
Are you able to tell us what is alarming in it? But all I'd want to say to folk, this is now supposedly sub judice. We don't want to further aggravate your situation. And part of why they do this retaliation tactic is they want you to make mistakes, and then they can get you. And then you suddenly find yourself, oh my gosh. And that's really a part of what my job as a social worker counselor is, to share experience that I've got from others to help people to be prudent, to know what steps to avoid, what risks not to take, to make sure that you bond in solidarity with others. But you did say that if this eventually does go to trial, what do you think? Can you talk about that? Can you tell us why you don't think it might?
I can tell you from my personal situation, they will be highly embarrassed. And that's pretty much what I can say of the matter. There's no evidence in the docket against me. That's the end of the matter.
Mm. My exasperation is that, let's talk about Shamila Batoy's point, that Shamila Batoy says we cannot prosecute our way out of corruption. Well, she says it's necessary, but not sufficient. And I get the thread of what she's going to. But if your prosecution is seemingly, from my point of view, let me exercise my own informed opinion here without putting you at risk. My opinion is, well, we're certainly not going to prosecute our way out of corruption if this is how such a high profile, such an important corruption case is being handled. To elaborate, there are 4 domains in society where truth matters and where it must be cardinal. It's in the media. I'm afraid we don't see often a real commitment from journalists to really be rigorous with the truth there. Secondly, it's the courts, where obviously before a trial, you're not allowed to lie in court. It's in Parliament, where you're supposed to, ministers have to answer factually and can be in contempt if they don't. And then it's in academia. And the foundation for a truth-loving society must be where the universities have to commit as a foundation its commitment to truth. I've just come from a lecture given by Maria Ressa, the Filipino journalist who actually has undergone extraordinary retaliation for standing out and calling out the president of the Philippines. And this is what she had to say.
What is the role and the importance of universities in ensuring that journalism is supported and held up, and that the ethics of what we do are celebrated, actually?
Your energy, exactly this. So here's the upside. And I said this in the Nobel lecture, right? We are standing, an atom bomb exploded in our information ecosystem, and we are standing on the rubble of the world that was. So the challenge is to rebuild it better, more empathetic, more sustainable, right? All of the things. And how does the next generation do this? Because we're still here. We're trying. But gosh, because I do, the median age in Rappler is 23 years old. When the first cases started coming against us, I met with our entire team because I knew their parents were going to be worried about them. We had a young team. The woman, the reporter whom Duterte bullied, like literally in the same room, moved her away from the mic and was literally bullying her. She was 26 years old at that time, right? And yet she had the courage to stand up against the most powerful man in the Philippines. This generation can build it better than what we had, but it will take so much from all of us, right? In order to stay in the same place and retain our facts, that facts first PH pyramid means we work 4 times harder because the system weighs in on the side of lies. Why is that allowed, right? They make more money at it, but why is that allowed?
So academia has a huge role to play.
Huge.
In what we're doing, huge. Prof, did you hear that, Prof Stevens?
Exactly what you said, right? And I think part of it is we need to be able, I think the other part that's missing in all of this is the listening part. Because I also worry that all of us are being pushed towards to become narcissists on social media, right? It's not about you, and yet it is about you, right? That's also why, we need to ground our next generation into, I come from Southeast Asia, and this concept of the greater good, that it isn't just the individual will that's important, but the individual's work for the greater good, right? In Singapore, they would call it Confucianism. But we know this. We've lived in countries under systems that are oppressive, and we know what it means to get out of it.
Okay, so that's Maria Ressa's point, and she was very optimistic about South Africa and where we're going because of our constitution and our experience. And she says that fortunately in South Africa, we've still got enough memory of the apartheid era surviving for us not to allow ourselves to go too quickly down the tubes. We also, she was talking about social media and how that's been so badly abused by policy. But South Africa doesn't have as much penetration of social media as do other countries in the West. So I've shared that with you to encourage you too, Sarah, because we can still use social media positively, and we're going to now do this in sharing this video, and they can't stop us because it's our democratic freedom and freedom of expression.
If I can just add to that democratic freedom of expression. Bradley has said it on more than one occasion, but the violations that we spoke about earlier, there needs to be accountability and punishment to the officials that inflicted this on us. And we believe that the only way that they will be punished is if they adopt a more American approach to the manner in which the courts accept evidence from police and accept the version of police when they themselves do not follow protocol. And they abuse people that are laying in jail cells that maybe can't even afford to pay the 500 Rand bail to get out. It has opened our eyes to what is really happening behind the scenes with poorer individuals as well. But your status doesn't count over there. You get treated equally as poorly in those circumstances. And the Constitutional Court, like Bradley's pointed out on several occasions, needs to weigh in. We can't have the Constitutional Court being so far out of reach and so far disconnected from what is really happening on the ground floor, which I believe in the criminal justice system is the case. Because if someone cannot afford 500 Rand bail, how is the Constitutional Court ever going to see the abuses that are taking place at the level of police and warrants and constables?
Any last words, Sarah, for the benefit of the whistleblower community, or the witness bearer community, as I prefer to call them?
Yes. I just want to, add, it almost sounds like, Miss America and you're receiving a prize. But there have been some extremely bold people that have stood by Bradley and myself through the entire journey. And that is from you yourself, John, that has been extremely supportive, and the other names that I've mentioned, but our clients as well, that have stood by us and know our integrity. And to anybody that is going through this pain and suffering, it will pass. We always joke that it's a terrible, terrible saying. It's the last thing you want to hear, but it does pass, and you have to pick yourself up, and you can't give up. You've got to continue. You've chosen a path, and you walk the walk. And, another cliche, you do come out stronger on the other side, but you also come out more resilient, more excited to help other people, more caring, and more in touch with human nature.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Well, just to round things off, let me just tell you a story which also gives me a chance to give a bit of a plug again to my friends Simon and Cheryl Blackburn's wonderful guest lodge in the Natal Midlands, 3 Tree Hill Lodge, where I have spent a lot of time over the last number of 15 years or so, researching the Molly Blackburn story in the library that the family have established in her honor. And these visuals of their place and the library give you an idea of where I get a lot of my inspiration from. Now, on one of my many stopovers over the past years, I happened to meet another guest who was a retired school principal who was also visiting. I forget his name, but I think he was from Kearney College, which was one of the private schools in KwaZulu-Natal. Anyway, we got chatting about this politically correct idea of talking about learners rather than pupils or scholars, which has become very much the fashion in our educational systems. And he thought it was ridiculous. And he said, where is this idea of learners coming from? Because the implication is that you're no longer a learner after you've left school. You only stop being a learner when you die. And then he added cynically, or when you become a politician. Now, this is not meant to be a put down on Oscar Mabuyane in particular, but just to raise the deeper learning question as to what did the retired school principal mean by saying that? What is it about politics that shuts down the capacity to learn? Well, it's the problem of power and the effect it has on the brain. And in this video, I go into the work of Ian McGilchrist, who is a psychiatrist, neurologist, and philosopher who's written this extraordinary book called The Matter with Things, The Brain, Our Delusions, and the Unmaking of the World. I had this conversation with Alex Gomez, Marine, who has helped ensure that Ian's extraordinary insights have become more public and widespread. In short, power alters the chemistry of the brain by stimulating dopamine secretion, which over time, with too much of it, becomes addictive. And to make matters worse, because of the neuroplasticity of the brain, I think the neural pathways for learning become rewired to only favor the interests of the politician to stay in power, which means the left hemisphere of the brain. Now, the corrupting effect of power is such that it leads you to only use half your brain on the left side, which is far more reductionist, has a very much more linear and binary narrative of truth, which is woefully inadequate to the full reality of truth, which we need to find ways through the myriad problems that we face in our world. And it's your right hemisphere that's so vitally necessary for people to become really educated, because that is where our capacity for imagination, for poetry, music, paradox, that's where it resides. And Ian McGilchrist explains it beautifully. Now, the whole point about getting educated is to expand your brain and your mind and your consciousness so that you have a more holistic or fullest view of the reality. And now we can never get a full view. We can only get a fuller view, and it requires social learning, it requires integration, all that stuff. So this is not to shame and embarrass Oscar Mabuyane. I try to be hard on the problem, gentle on the people. And I'm concerned that the underlying problem is that if our academic institutions forsake truth and become places where degrees are faked, it bodes very badly for the future of our society, which was the point made by Maria Ressa. At an individual level, I still very much believe that saying, which I think can be traced back to St. Augustine, but I think George Bernard Shaw used it in one of his plays, which says, every saint has had a past. Every sinner can have a future. But if one has the ambitions to rise in power, it's so important that one, by so doing, becomes a good role model for younger people to imitate. And I have now no longer any doubt that the most foundational learning process of our human species in our development and our evolution has in fact been imitation. I've got another video which talks all about that. It's a work of René Girard and his work on mimetic desire or cultural mimesis, in which it explains it fully. So there's something else for you if you really find yourself stuck in prison needing to while away the time. Hopefully they will at least give access to some of my YouTube videos. I think it would be a fitting punishment. Anyway, So when Shamila Batoy says we can't prosecute corruption out of the system, I actually agree with her. She's pleading for people who aspire to lead, to step up, to become role models of good ethical leadership. Now, how's that going to happen? Well, I've never been in prison myself, but I have had clients who have spent time in prison. I've learned a lot from them, and I very much like the policy, on paper at least, that the Department of Correctional Services uses. I like the name change and would like to see every prison become a correctional center. So I have a proposal for our new Minister of Correctional Services, Minister Pieter Groenewald. I'm only half joking when I say this. How about we reestablish Robben Island as a dedicated correctional center for convicted politicians, officials, business people who are convicted of fraud and corruption to go and find correctional rehabilitation. It would probably need a bit of expansion to cater for the demand, but in the expansion plan, it could be formally recognized as a proper educational institution, not where corrupted politicians, government officials, and business people go to die, but where they go to get a new start on life, to give their neural pathways a chance to be rewired back to hopefully what they originally were, empathetic, caring people, and become learners again. Now, I'm sure Saki Matlozoma and other former inmates from the 70s and 80s would be more than willing to do some input to educate their former comrades of how they could behave if they're wanting to really become successful, admired, and cherished in our society in the way that we do Nelson Mandela. So, Minister Groenewald, I'm sure you could get Gayton McKenzie will be happy to do some inputs as well from his own life experience. He's been through the whole thing too, so he knows all about that. I think South Africa can be a wonderful place if we just get a bit of imagination going. To end, some more bonus material from Maria Ressa's lecture, which gives me a chance to share what my latest hobby horse has become. Sarah spoke about the problems in the judiciary and what the Constitutional Court needs to do to ensure justice is done. I got a chance to ask Maria Ressa a question and had a brief chat with her afterwards. So I leave this with you to ponder.
There we go. Now it's on.
My name's John Clark. I'm a social worker for the last 20 years, been working with activists, journalists and whistleblowers. Latterly with whistleblowers and the retaliation they suffer because they are the sources for often the journalists, and the journalists are what the sources for the activists, that there seems to be like an attempt to shut the truth at source by retaliating brutally against them. And they didn't sign up for this as journalists, as activists and social workers like me kind of did. So I wanted to know, we're thinking in South Africa that what we've got to do is actually bypass the legislature and the executive and go straight to the Constitutional Court and get kind of an executive order, a Constitutional Court mandate to instruct the legislature to now change the Protected Disclosures Act and to make sure that people who speak truth to power, wherever they're on that chain, are actually protected, supported, and encouraged. And I want to know if I can ask you to do a supporting affidavit for that.
This reminds me a little bit of Brazil, where they have a constitutional court again, and their constitutional court is putting rules in place now, because this isn't just the information ecosystem, it's surveillance, right? The surveillance part, we now have new weapon systems that are being tested in Ukraine and Gaza, right? Where the same flawed LLM, the targeting system, except that targeting system is not 100% accurate. And what happens when you use it in war with virtual impunity and you just happen to target, oh my gosh, the wrong person and the wrong family's house, right? These are all things that have to do with impunity of technology. The whistleblowers will be the first step, but civic engagement has got to be the first step. Right? We need to wake up our citizens. We need to figure out, and I hope South Africa will be the first to do this, what does civic engagement look like in the age of lies? What does that look like? How do we stand up to this? Because if the citizens don't demand it, journalists can't do our jobs. For whom?